You guys are on GoToWebinar, leave me a comment and let me know that the audio is okay, because this thing loves to change my audio settings, unfortunately. So there's a question box on the right-hand side. You guys hear me okay? If it's blown out, let me know, because we're trying to use this recording. Anybody? If you're on Facebook Live, you can do the same thing. That'd be great. Thanks, Bruce. Got it. All right, cool. All right, so this is... Okay, thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. All right, so a couple days, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 days ago, I can't remember where it was at here. Let me scroll down. I'll tell you. Let's see, February 2nd. So 8 days ago, I did this post here about, the fact that there were 333 days left in the year, and my objective was to get out a webinar or a podcast or both every single day for the remainder of the year. But I wanted topics that you guys actually wanted covered. So if you're on here and you haven't seen this post, you want to go down here. We've got, unfortunately, out of 15,000 people, only 26 questions so far. So we're missing about 307 questions left that need to be filled out. And I know you guys have them because you're coming across stuff every single day. Okay, so if you haven't done that yet and you have other questions, you're going to have questions during this. You can ask them live. But over and above that, once you get off and you start thinking about stuff or you're working a deal, go ahead and add them here so we can get this information out there and get it covered for everybody, okay? All right, so this first question, that's the wrong one. The first question was actually posted by Brandon Dollar. Let me go back and make sure I'm correct. Brandon Dollar right here, okay? And the question was, what are the different situations I need to know whether to use one contract over another? For example, using a land trust over a contract for deed or installment sales agreement. Great question, okay? This is everybody's pretty much first question, especially when they get started off in real estate investing. So let's go over that real quick. So how do you know which contract to use? So people ask me this all the time in courses and coaching and on Facebook and all that stuff. And the answer is I don't know, okay? Until I get into a deal and I have spoken to the parties, I have no idea what type of contract I'm going to use because I don't know what the deal parameters are. Now, having said that, I have a pretty good idea, generally speaking, of exactly what I'm going to do when I go in, but I don't know exactly which kind of contract I'm going to use or what contract structure I'm going to use until I get information from the other parties. But that being said, let's talk about how to know which contract to use and what it depends on. It's going to depend on the deal type, okay? So what type of a deal are you doing? Are you doing a straight conventional purchase? Are you doing an assignment deal, what they mistakenly call wholesaling? Are you doing an option where you're just trying to tie a property up for a period of time to either decide later on if you want to buy it and sell it or you want to whatever you want to do with it? Are you doing an owner finance deal? It depends on what type of deal is it that you're actually doing, okay? What's the deal structure, the deal strategy? That's going to be one of the things that dictates what type of contract to use. All right, next is the intent. What is the intent of the parties? This is a huge, huge, huge thing that is never touched upon in any other course, because intent is everything, and intent is what gets you into trouble in court, okay? If your intent is not correct, if your intent is fraudulent. As an example, do not use a lease option if the intent is an actual sale. So in other words, if you're marketing properties for rent to own, and you're trying to slam people into a lease option contract so that you don't have to foreclose to evict, and you're trying to dump all of the buyer response or the owner responsibilities on them, like maintenance and repairs and providing rent credits and creating, basically what you're doing is you're creating a disguised sale from the onset. If the intent is a sale, then you need to make it a sale as opposed to a disguised sale, because otherwise you're going to have problems. So intent is huge, okay? And the difference is, just so you understand under law how important intent is, if I said to you, and I've covered this before, that it's not illegal to kill somebody, right? You'd be like, yes, it is. I mean, you're talking about murder. That's completely illegal, right? Well, yes and no. If the intent is to murder somebody, then it's illegal, right? But if the intent was not to kill somebody because you're acting in self-defense, right? Let me rephrase that. If the intent was not to murder someone because you're acting in self-defense, then it's not illegal to kill somebody. Okay? Does that make sense? So intent is everything. So make sure that you're coming from a place of integrity when you're out there doing deals with people. Everybody knows what's going on, and your intent is, as it relates to these contracts, is intact and the way that it should be for whatever type of deal it is that you're doing. All right? So, I can't emphasize that enough, and I see it pitched in all these courses and stuff all the time where people are, they want to slam dunk everybody into a lease option deal, and which is not a good deal for anybody except for the guy doing the deal. It's not a good deal for the tenant. And let me qualify that. If the intent is a sale, it's a horrible deal for the tenant optionee. Okay, it's a terrible deal for the tenant optionee. If the actual intent is a lease option, then you can make a win-win deal. Okay. All right. Next up is sophistication of the parties. What am I talking about here? We're going to get into the land trust here in a second, and it'll become extremely clear what I'm referring to. But depending on how sophisticated the people are that you're dealing with, there are times when you have to use different contract structures that you would prefer, because number one, they don't understand some of the more complex things like land trusts and all the terminology and grantors and grantees and just all of all the documents that are involved, and it overcomplicates things, and you can really mess up deals because they don't get it, and a confused mind cannot make a decision, right? Confused minds don't make a decision, or the decision they make is no, and so it really depends on who you're dealing with and what level of education and experience they have. Okay. And then the next thing is your exit strategy. What is your out? What are you trying to do here? How are you looking to get out of this property? Maybe you're not trying to get out of the property. Maybe you're trying to do a long-term buy and hold for a monthly cash flow, and that's a different contract type than perhaps one where you are trying to get out and you want to get out within a certain period of time. That could be same day via an assignment. That could be, in a year via a refinance on an owner finance contract. What's the exit strategy? Okay, these are things, again, that people are not told in these other courses as to how you know which contract to use. And that's why I hate these courses where, it's all, everything has to fit into one little box, right? Everything is the exact same thing over and over and over again. And that's not how professional investors operate. It's not what I do. It's not what anybody else I know that's a professional actually does. I don't know the contract type until I've had conversations, understand the deal structure, understand whether or not there actually is a deal, number one, and how do we make it a win-win deal so it's a win for all parties, because as my mentor told me 30 plus years ago, if it's not a good deal for everybody, it's not a good deal. Okay? So I'm looking to create win-win deals that make everybody happy, and obviously we make money. So there you go. So let's talk about some of the standard contract types. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with a standard purchase and sale agreement. It's also known as a PNSA or a PSA. If you're on Facebook, for people that are into the whole brevity thing, you'll see that all the time. So if you didn't know what a PSA or a PNSA was, that's what it stands for. Purchase and sale agreement. This is your conventional, standard vanilla purchase contract. Okay, that you use, realtors use, whatever, standard purchase deal. Right. Other contract types, options. What does that mean? Well, we're going to cover all this stuff anyway, but on an option, you can option a property, for as little as $1, and you have that property locked up at a predetermined price, okay? But you don't have to close. You have the option to purchase it or not to purchase it, right? Assignments. I'm sure everybody that's on here is familiar with assignments. It's what they call, and most of the time incorrectly, wholesaling, which has nothing to do with wholesaling at all. But contract assignments, where you're going to assign the contract over for a fee called an assignment fee. Owner finance contracts. Okay, we're going to get into the various types of owner finance contracts here in a second, and when to use each one. And then obviously, everybody knows what a lease is, right? So no mystery there. All right, owner finance contract types. Let's talk about these, because this goes back to what the original question was. How do you know which one to use and when? So here, let's cover this real quick. Contract for deed And I'm going to go through all of these in detail in just a second. But contract for deed, for those of you guys who don't know, contract for deed, installment sales contract, bond for title, grant deed, land contract are all basically the exact same thing. Okay? They're called different things in different regions of the country. As an example, in California, you have to do what's called a grant deed. Okay, they don't recognize contract for deed. In other states, you will hear bond for title. Okay, it's the same exact thing. Some states, like Florida, everybody knows what a land contract is. They also know what contract for deed is. But it depends on what region that you're in as to where some of these contract types will be more familiar with the local population based on the state and the familiarity with the contract type. But they're all essentially the same thing. Essentially what you're doing is you're buying the property on contract, and what does that mean? It means basically you're signing a piece of paper to buy the property. And if you do it the way that I do it, it's done, no money down. I don't put money down on any of these things. I get properties all the time for no cash out of pocket, no credit, no mortgage that I have to go get, none of that stuff. And then I have an exit strategy on the single family residential stuff. And that exit strategy is either to, one, assign and get out, or two, to hold as a sandwich deal, stay in the middle and collect monthly payments and cash flow. And then the back end spread when it's done correctly, you can generate up to 4 different revenue streams on a contract for deed. And those 4 different revenue streams would be your initial upfront down payment, okay, and then monthly cash flow, principal balance reduction on the underlying note if the contract is structured properly, and then your back end spread. So in other words, if I bought the property at $500,000 and I sold it at $550,000, you got $50,000 on the backside. In addition to whatever the principal balance reduction was, if you structure the contract properly from the very beginning, plus your monthly cash flow, plus the initial upfront down payment. And so the return is actually exponential because there's no, when you talk about a cash on cash return, I have no cash involved in the deal. Okay. What I have is, basically, for lack of a better term, sweat equity or experience and expertise and however long it took to put the deal together. And just so you guys understand, you see a lot of people waste the time on these wholesale deals or contract assignment deals they call wholesaling, and all kinds of money and time and energy and effort and all this stuff. And on a standard owner finance deal, you can start and finish and close and get paid all the same day. Okay, no waiting for future closings, no clearing titles, none of the other nonsense yet. No marketing cost, whatever. The only thing that you need are a buyer, a seller, and a contract, and that's it. Okay, that's simple. And then I've done that many times and gotten a wire same day where I started off with absolutely nothing in the morning. Okay, so going back to these, so we have contract for deed. Everybody should know what a contract for deed is. You're contracting for the deed of the property. You're going to make payments and take over maintenance and repairs for a period of time. We got your installment sales contract, basically the exact same thing. Okay, land contract, basically the exact same thing. Bond for title, basically the exact same thing. Grant deed, little different. Depending on how it's structured, but basically the same thing. Then we get to a land trust. Okay, now this is a whole different animal. All right, and you need to understand these, and I'm going to explain to you what the benefits are of a land trust here in just a couple minutes. But you need to understand how land trusts function and operate, and you'll start to understand too what I talk about the complexity stuff here in a second. And then there's also what's called a subject to, which is also known as a wraparound mortgage. This is actually not a contract type, so let me be clear on this, okay? Subject to is not a contract type. Subject to is a buy, hold, and exit strategy, okay? Because on a subject to deal, you're going to use a purchase and sale agreement, okay? And it's going to be, we'll go through that here in a second too, it'll be subject to, the reason they're called subject to, it's subject to the existing financing that's in place, whatever that is, okay, and any liens on the property, et cetera, okay. So it's not a contract type; it is more of it's a whole buy and hold and exit strategy that uses a number of different contracts, but it's called subject to. You guys will hear all this stuff. So there we go. Which one is the best for buying? Unquestionably, absolute best one is what's called a land trust. Most people have not ever done a land trust, okay? They hear about them, but they don't understand them. They don't get educated on them. Most people don't teach anything about land trusts or why they are the best, why it would be my preferred go-to contract all day, every day, on every single deal. Okay, it is the one where I would try to cram everything into a land trust if possible for the reasons I'm about to show you. All right. So why is the land trust the best? Okay, with a properly structured land trust, you have what's called privacy and anonymity. In other words, nobody knows that you're even involved in the transaction. Okay, and I'm not talking about the principals like you're buying from somebody or you're selling to somebody. Obviously, you know the parties involved in the trust. Okay, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about anybody else. So, as an example, when you go out there and you do a standard, conventional purchase and sale, well, it gets recorded. Who's the buyer, right? Who has the mortgage on the property? Who's on the property tax records? That's all going to be you. Okay, you don't have that on a land trust. You don't have those issues. So you've got complete privacy and complete anonymity. For those of you who don't know, I live here in Orlando, and back in 1965, when Walt Disney was out here buying, I think it was like 40, I can't remember what the hell it was, 43 square miles of property that they've got here to build out Disney World and Epcot and Animal Kingdom and all the other stuff, Hollywood Studios, all the water parks, all the other stuff that they have here, the resorts. What he did was he used a land trust to buy all of the property because you have to keep in mind how many different parcels he was buying. All right. And what he did not want, this goes back to benefit number one, privacy and anonymity. What he did not want was anybody knowing that it was him that was buying all the property. Why did he not want that? Because two things. He didn't want them to jack the price up because they obviously knew he was, at the time, he was, multi-millionaire many times over, if not a billionaire. I don't know what his actual status was at that point, but obviously very, very wealthy. And the way he was able to acquire all these continuous and contiguous parcels was by purchasing everything in land trust. As a result, he didn't get prices jacked up because they knew who he was and he could afford it. And number two, he also didn't have holdouts. So in other words, there's not some big mobile home park in the middle of Disney World, right? Because the people who own the mobile home park held out because they found out that it was Disney and they decided, I'm not going to sell, right? So didn't have those problems. So it's very, 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 very effective when you're trying to, move with stealth to not have to pay more and to not have holdouts so that you can complete your deal. Okay. Next up, it keeps the asset out of probate. You guys know what probate is. Hopefully you know what probate is. Unfortunately, somebody dies and their assets, their property has to go through probate court. And it's a big hullabaloo and big waste of time and money and energy and effort and all that kind of stuff. And a land trust will keep that property out of probate. Okay, beautiful thing. Next up, it protects the property from judgments or liens from the other parties involved in the trust. Okay, so if you're involved in a trust with partners, okay, or whoever's involved in the trust, and they get sued and they get a judgment or lien, well, it doesn't impact your portion of the property and your asset. It doesn't impact your rights at all. Okay, very, very cool. Next up is ease of conveyance. So most of you understand conveyance as a very costly enterprise whereby you have to close on a property, go to a title company or a real estate attorney, pay all the fees, pay the doc stamps, pay all all the closing costs, pay all those things. And with a land trust, you don't have to do any of that. Okay, how cool is that, right? You can easily convey the beneficial interest in the property, or in the, let me rephrase that, in the trust. The property becomes an asset of the trust itself, but you can easily convey the beneficial interest in the trust to another party without having to go through all that rigmarole. All right, another example here in the state of Florida. Okay, as long as the sole purpose of the land trust is not to avoid foreclosure. In other words, I acquire a property regardless of how I did it. I can acquire the property by paying cash, which I don't do, by the way. I could acquire property with a mortgage, which I don't do either, by the way. Could acquire a property on a contract for deed or a land contract or another land trust or however I contracted on that property. And then I'm going to sell that property to a third party, okay? And for the purpose of being in a sandwich where I'm going to make, again, those 4 different revenue streams. As long as the purpose of the land trust was not to avoid the state of Florida's foreclosure requirement on owner finance deals, which that would not be my sole reason for doing land trust, as I'm explaining here and have been for years, then there is no foreclosure required if the person that's in the property defaults. So in other words, unlike a contract for deed, if I do a contract for deed, and most states are like this too, well, there's been equitable interest conveyance in the property to the buyer, right? And I can't just simply, technically, I can't simply evict them because they have equitable interest, and normally you have to take them through the foreclosure process first and then evict, okay? So make sure you guys understand that. Here in Florida, you have to check your whatever state you're doing a deal in to see what the statute is there. But in that particular case, again, let me clarify this. The caveat is, as long as the sole purpose of the land trust was not to avoid foreclosure, you can avoid foreclosure and go right into eviction and get the person out of the property and then resell it. Okay, so huge benefit. And then you can obviously, again, and I'm going to clarify this, you can avoid the due on sale clause with proper conveyance. Now, what does that mean? Everybody, the big real estate, urban myth boogeyman, I've got a whole podcast episode on this, but is the due on sale clause in the mortgage, okay? And basically what it says, what the banks have in there, is that at their discretion, when you're doing an owner finance deal, right? It's not even just an owner finance deal. If there's any title conveyance, okay, whether it's done on a contract for deed, if it's a subject to where you're doing the wraparound mortgage, where you've conveyed the deed, whatever it is, if there's any conveyance, okay, that is what they call a sale, right? Regardless of the fact that nobody paid the mortgage off. That's what the bank calls a sale. And so they have a clause called the due on sale clause. The due on sale means that, okay, upon sale, we have the ability to accelerate the note, okay, which means they can try to force you to refinance and or pay them off within 30 days of notice. Okay. 99% of the people that are in real estate are terrified of the due on sale clause in a mortgage. Okay. And that's because most of them don't understand exactly how things work. And you hear this thing thrown around all the time. Oh, due on sale, due on sale, due on sale, right? Here's the reality. Okay. And I've been in this game for over 30 years. I have never once had any property called for due on sale, nor do I know anybody else that has, nor can I find anyone that has ever had a note accelerated based off of a title conveyance, okay, or deed conveyance. If you can find that person for me, I would love for somebody to finally find, after 30 years, somebody who has actually had this clause enforced, because I can't find it. Jonathan Rexford can't find it. Bill Walston can't find it. None of us can find, any person that's ever been a victim of the due on sale clause. Okay. Now, does that mean that there haven't been times where people haven't been had notes accelerated? And the answer to that question is yes, but it was not because of due on sale. It's because of a default. Okay. And what they got was a lis pendens, which is the notice of foreclosure or notice of litigation to start the foreclosure process. It had nothing to do with due on sale. Okay, so understand that. But on a properly structured land trust, you can completely avoid the due on sale clause. Okay, and it depends on what type of deal structure you're doing, but that you don't even have to worry about it. Okay, so and for your reference, because I always tell you guys to vet everything, including me, and do all your own due diligence. You need to look up what's called the Garn-St. Germain Act, so that you can see where the legislation was actually enacted that enables you to avoid the due on sale with proper conveyance. Okay. Now, great question here. If land trusts are so great, why isn't everyone using them? Well, many people don't know what they are to begin with. And the easiest answers to this are the following: complexity and confusion. Okay. And as a result, land trusts are a great way to lose what could have been a great deal. So, Vincent, why don't you use land trusts on everything that you do? Well, the answer is I endeavor to. Okay. I try to. I hate to use the word try, but I try to. The problem that you run into, and I'm going to bust out of this for a second. Let me show you guys this real quick so you'll understand, is when you're talking to Joe and Sally homeowner, and you're trying to get them, to sell you the property or whatever. Hang on a second. I got to find this real quick. then what happens is, number one, they don't understand what it is. All right, and this is Chicago Title, by the way. Okay, Chicago Title Land Trust Company. Here's all the free forms that you need. Okay, and you don't have to have all of these executed. It depends on what you're doing, but you got to, okay. Let's just go over these real quick so you understand. And I guarantee you, most of you have never even heard of any of these things. Acceptance of transfer of beneficial interest and ratification W-9. Okay, do you think Joe and Sally Homeowner are going to have any idea what that is? No. Well, it's going to explain to you what happens right here. What's the purpose of that, right? All right, amendment of the contingent beneficial interest. Do you think they have any idea what that means? No, they don't. Okay, now again, Chicago Title is explaining it to you right now. Amendment of the power of direction. Okay, again, they're not going to understand that. Assignment of the beneficial interest. That's pretty easy to understand. Okay, most people you can get through that with. Corporate resolutions. Okay, the deed in trust, quit claim, deed in trust, warranty deed. Direction to convey, okay, used to request issuance of deed when property is being transferred out of the trust, blah, blah, blah. All right, grantor grantee statement, facsimile assignment of beneficial interest, letter of direction. I mean, do you see what's happening here? You see how this thing is like loading up? And you don't, like I said, you don't have to have all of these to do a land trust or a properly structured land trust, but you're going to have several of these agreements executed by somebody who has no clue whatsoever what they're signing, okay? And so what happens is, especially when you get into who's the grantor, who's the grantee, who's the trustee, who's the beneficiary, how does this whole thing work? You're not dealing with entities on a contract like buyer and seller or tenant and optionee, right? Optionor, optionee, tenant and landlord, right? You're not dealing with stuff that they're familiar with. So what can happen, and this has happened to me before, which is why, like I said, you want to gauge the sophistication of who you're dealing with before you try to slam dunk them into this, because it's a great deal for all parties, including them. But if they don't understand it, the confused mind only makes a decision of no, and that's not what you're looking for. Okay, so that's the biggest reason why I personally don't always use them, even though that would be my preferred methodology for all the reasons that we just covered. Okay, so what you can do, and what I do advise doing, is you can get them started with, as an example, a contract for deed, which is very easy to explain, right? What are you doing? We're contracting for the deed of the property. You don't have to convey the deed to me. I'm going to make payments on the property, and then I'm going to refinance the property. If there's a balloon during the balloon period, there's no balloon, then you pay it off over time, whatever it is. And eventually, once I've paid you all the money, then you're going to convey the deed to me. Very simple, right? You can explain it in less than 30 seconds. Not a big deal. Everybody's going to understand what that is. You start getting into land trusts and, like I said, who's the beneficiary and the beneficial interest, what is that? And all these other, you're going to take somebody and their head's going to explode, and you're going to not do a deal that you could have done where you could have made some really good cash. So easiest way to do it is to ease them into it with something that they're comfortable with, like a contract for deed or a land contract or whatever. And then once the deal is done, you're in place, payments are being made on time, they're happy and copacetic, then at that point, then you can, sit them back down and have a new conversation to explain, hey, look, we want to shift over to this, and here's why. Because now you have their trust. They have, executed a contract. You have fulfilled your obligations, right? You've got credibility, and now you can move into a more complex contract. That's a much better way than to try to go at sometimes with, this kind of thing right out of the gate where they're not going to understand what you're talking about, okay? So getting back to Brandon's original question, when to use a specific contract type. All right, we're going to talk largely about owner finance contracts here because that's what most of you are trying to do. But we'll go through the wholesaling stuff too. Contract for deed and variance, which include, like I said, land contract, installment sales contract, bond for title, grant deed sort of. Okay, when do you use this contract? When you want to buy and take control of a property without deed conveyance, and what I should say there is without the need for deed conveyance, but with the ability to force production of the deed via payoff. What does that mean? Let me give you a typical scenario. And I have done this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. I could go out there and right now I can go buy a property, and we've done this up into the multi-millions, All right, here, I'll give you a real deal. Marietta, Georgia, for those of you guys that are familiar with Atlanta, I contracted on a $1.2 million new construction property, brand new construction, nobody ever lived in it, with the builder, okay, who had a Keller Williams real estate broker representing the property. So you can do deals with realtors. It's not that often, but in some cases you can. And I contracted on the property. My contract was for $1. Okay, it cost me $1 to contract on that property. And then I sold it to a former NFL football player who then, made a down payment and started making monthly payments and lived in the property. Okay, that was all done on a contract for deed. Okay, cost $1. Was there deed conveyance? No, I don't need deed conveyance. What I want is control of the property. Okay, and once I had control of the property, then I had the ability to do what I want to do with the property at that point in time. Okay, so you need to understand, the whole thing with deed conveyance. If you can get it, obviously get it, but it's not necessary, and I don't get it on most transactions because it isn't necessary. And really, the only thing that it does, for those of you who don't understand how the law works and how court works and everything else, the only thing that a deed does when there is a security instrument in place in front of it. What's the security instrument? You're going to have a security deed, or you're going to have an all-inclusive deed and trust in front of it, which means what? That you can't do anything until and unless you've paid off the mortgage and you have a lien release, or what they call a release of lien. Okay. The only thing the deed is going to do is help you stay in a property longer without paying as you're being taken through the foreclosure process. Okay. That's all it does. Okay. So I don't really care about the deed. What I want is control. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Okay. So I don't mean some people, they go out there, they overcomplicate things to make things harder than they need to be to get deals done. The deed, I don't care about it. It doesn't make a difference to me. As long as I have control of the property, right, and I have the ability to force production of the deed via payoff, that's all I need. That's all I need to make money. Okay, I don't have to, like you talk to a lot of people, they're gonna get twitchy when you start talking about them conveying a deed, which they have to do on a land trust too, by the way. And so, why overcomplicate it? What's it going to do for me? I have no intention of defaulting on the property, number one. So I'm not worried about being able to stay in the property for a longer period of time without making payments, because it's not me in the house making the payments anyway. It's going to be somebody else. And if somebody defaults on me, then I'm going to get them out and get somebody else in there. Okay. And that's why I get the down payment. Now I got a buffer, or have a reserve in the event that I have to make a payment on a house, which I have not had to do, thankfully. Because when you're dealing in this type of a deal structure, you're dealing with people that want to own homes, not people that want to rent homes. So it's a different type of individual. It doesn't mean that, they're not people and they don't have problems. They don't get fired. They don't get in car accidents and all kinds of stuff like that, or go through divorces or whatever, or have financial problems that will cause a default. I get about every 24 months. Thankfully, it's not much more often than that. A scenario where there's a potential for a default on a property, or somebody hasn't paid on the first, let me put it like that, and for whatever that reason is, and then we have to get involved and show them how they can make additional money, okay, so that they don't have to default. We don't have to take them through either the foreclosure process or the eviction process, or both. All right, so totally different animal. But like I said, I don't care. I don't need the deed. Okay. All I care about is I want control, and I want the ability to get the deed once the payoff is taken care of. Okay. Because control means I get to make money. All right. Subject 2, which is called a wraparound mortgage. For those of you who may not know that. Okay. It's the same thing. All right. You use this contract structure, and it's not really a contract structure. This is a strategy, but there's a list of contracts that you would use for this particular strategy when you want to buy and control a property on contract, okay, with deed conveyance. Okay, so you are going to get the deed, and you're buying the property subject to the existing liens on the property. So typically a scenario like this would be, you have a seller, absentee owner, they've had to transfer for a job, don't live there anymore, whatever, and they're eating payments on a vacant property, right? And they don't want to do that. And so you have the ability to buy the property on contract, subject to the existing liens that are on the property, take over payments. Okay. And you can do that for, no money, for $1 for what's called good and valuable consideration. Okay, does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. If you guys have questions, by the way, load them up in the question box on GoToWebinar or on Facebook, on the Facebook Live, so I can get them answered while we're on here. But when you would use the subject to strategy when you're actually going to get the deed. Okay, when you're going to get the deed, and then you get the deed recorded, and it's in your name or the name of your LLC or corporation or whatever, or trust or whatever, however you're setting things up, you would actually get control of the property, and you would actually have the deed at that point, and then you'd also be responsible for the monthly payments on the underlying note. Okay, make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Cool. All right, option. Options are used when you want the option but not the requirement to purchase a property. Okay, so an example of that would be, there's a lot of different examples I can give you, but let's just say, for example, you see a house and you believe that you have an ability to flip that house, whether it's through a contract assignment or through an actual sale, on a properly structured option. This is a key word there, properly structured option. You would have the ability to option the property for as little as $1, literally. All right, and then legally, if it's done, again, the option has got to be structured properly, so don't just go out there and get some random option template form and fill it out. But for $1, you can get the option on the property, and then you can actually market the property for a sale or assignment or whatever. Okay, but you don't want to. Let me back up. You want to make sure that you've got the properly structured agreement. The option means you have the ability to purchase, but you don't have to, not the requirement. And you can get options. I've gotten options before for literally as little as $1. And so essentially, what happens on the option, if I'm going to give you guys some real help here, especially you guys that are out there struggling. We say this all the time. This question comes up all the time. As a matter of fact, somebody, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Stephen. Somebody posted this from, so I can find it here for you real quick. Posted this from another group. Okay, here we go. I'm sorry, it was Jason. Here we go. All right, from another wholesaling group that I'm in. It says, how do you back out of a contract? Listen to this. This is what I'll tell you. We talk about intent. Remember, if we go back to that slide, what did I tell you about, on right up front? Intent, right here. Here it is. What's the intent? What are you trying to do? Okay. Then just listen to this verbiage, and this is the kind of stuff that you definitely do not want memorialized in writing in social media when you're asking questions like this. How do you back out of a contract if, say, you can't get a buyer or your repair estimate was too low? And if you do back out, then does the title company come after you to get paid? Okay? Right? Somebody actually asked this question. And this goes to show you how poor the education is that's out there. Okay, so number one, you don't back out of a contract. And if you're going into the contract with the intent of backing out of the contract from the very beginning because you can't perform, because you can't get a buyer, or you screwed up and were negligent and your repair estimates were too low, right? Therefore, once again, you can't get a buyer. Unless you have, and I've done 2 podcast episodes on this. On number 1, you can't cancel a contract or back out of a contract. And on the other one, how to legally cancel or back out of a contract, okay? So in this situation, what these people are being taught to do is use what are called weasel clauses because, number 1, their intent going in, they're using, or let me rephrase that, they're engaging in what is called fraud in the inducement. And essentially what they're doing is they're positioning themselves as actual, cash buyers to buy a property. Of course, the seller doesn't know that they don't have two nickels to rub together. Can't get financing, whatever it is. And then they go out there and they shop the contract. They can't sell the contract or whatever it is. So now they're getting phone calls because their closing is about to be set up. They pulled title. So you have title expense, all this kind of stuff. And hey, how do I back out? The only legal way to do that is to have a legitimate bona fide disclosure up front as to what your intent is and a contingency clause that indicates when and how you can legally cancel that contract. But that is not what they teach you to do. Instead, what they teach you to do is do stupid things like, contract is contingent upon a third-party partner or some crap, some person that doesn't exist, that you have no idea who it is, and all that is legal, legalese mumbo jumbo to make it seem like you've got somebody else that has to approve of the deal. Otherwise, you have the ability to, quote unquote, back out of the deal. Okay, it's not being disclosed as to exactly what your intent is, which is to assign the contract. And it's very easy to do this stuff the right way and do it legally once you learn how to do that. But you don't go into a deal with the intent. See, part of the problem with this, like whoever this person was that asked this question, and I don't know who it was, but part of the problem was they were trained improperly, okay? Because number one, they're going inventory first. And you don't go inventory first, you go buyer first. Because if he had pre-qualified buyers, he would already know whether or not he had a deal to begin with, and that he would have an ability to flip that deal. And if he had been trained properly, he'd have a correctly structured contract in place that enabled him to do what was necessary to not only sell it, but also to legally cancel it in the event that it did not meet the requirements that he was looking for. Now, the reason they don't do that, okay, the reason they don't put those clauses in there is because they're afraid, of this waving this big red flag to a seller, which it does when they find out that you're not the guy actually buying the property. You're asking me to tie the property up, right? But you're not the guy actually buying the property. And so how do I know you're going to close? You want me to take my property off the market? No, that doesn't sound like a good deal, right? I don't know that you're not going to close. You can't tell me who's going to close. I don't know that anybody's ever going to close, and you want me to tie my property up and take it off the market. That's a bad deal. And of course the seller is going to have a red flag with that. But that's not how you approach it, okay? If you're going to want to do these types of transactions, that's not what you have to do. Or let me rephrase that. That's not what you do on those types of deals, okay? You can easily explain to them, number one, look, I understand your concern. I got it. And what we can do is we can make it non-exclusive, and you have the correct language in there, and your purchase contract, make it non-exclusive, and that you have to perform by a certain date, which you're going to have a certain closing date in the contract anyway, and that there is what's called a kick-out clause that you can put into the contract. And essentially what that means is the non-exclusivity means that the seller has an ability to legally continue marketing the property for sale. Okay? Meanwhile, you have the ability to go out there and shop the contract to see if you can get it assigned or if you can find a buyer for a double close. Okay? So you both have the ability to keep moving forward to get this property moved. That's the first part. Now, the second part is in the event that the seller gets a buyer, okay, somebody, a legitimate person that's interested. I'm not talking about some other daisy-chained wholesaler. I'm talking about an actual buyer that wants to purchase the property. Then the kick-out clause basically says he gives him the ability to say, hey, look, I've got a qualified buyer. They're ready, willing, and able to close, and I'm going to, I'm giving you what's called constructive notice that I'm exercising the kick-out clause, and that basically means that you have X number of hours, what could be 24, 48, 72, 96, whatever you end up negotiating, to either perform, right, and go hard on money at the title company and everything else, or you're kicked out and he has the legal ability to move forward with the other contract, okay? Now, I have done deal after deal after deal after deal with people on contracts for deed and that kind of thing with a kick-out clause, okay? Because if I can't perform, I don't want to hamstring the seller. I'm not trying to hurt him. And if he comes up with somebody legitimate that has the cash or some other deal before I do, which is unlikely because as a professional investor, I know I'm saying it's never happened or never could happen. But the likelihood is, we do this all day, every day. It's unlikely that he's going to outperform us, if that makes any sense. But I don't have any problem leaving that ability for them, because if they can sell the house, that's the ultimate objective, right? And if I don't perform, I don't need to hurt the guy. And obviously I don't deserve to get paid because I didn't do anything, right? I didn't perform. But that's not the way you guys are taught how to do stuff, the correct way. You can do all of this stuff, all the stuff that you want to do, have no liability, have no requirement to close, okay? Legally cancel the contract, all that stuff, if you approach it the right way up front, which unfortunately these stupid courses do not teach you to do, because guess what? It's hard. Why is it hard? Because you have to learn how to professionally sell and close, and they don't know how to do that, and they certainly can't teach you how to do that so that you can handle these situations out there when you're talking to a seller about doing, funky stuff that maybe doesn't sound like what they want. Okay. But yeah, you can contract on properties for $1. Okay. Everybody has $1. Everybody can be a real estate investor. Okay. You can contract on a property on an option, right? But you don't have to close, and you can have the right, if it's structured properly, you have the ability to shop that contract or shop the property and sell or assign, whatever you want to do. Okay. Assignment, essentially the same thing. You're going to, this is what they call, most people incorrectly call wholesaling, where you're going to do a contract assignment. This is used when you want to assign, now pay attention here, all right, title, and interest in a property or contract, usually for a fee called an assignment fee. Okay. You want to make money. That's the purpose of assigning the property. Now, where you're taught incorrectly is that you're supposed to wait for some future closing that you are not a party to get paid the assignment fee. And this is incorrect. This is not how professional real estate investors do it. Because why? Exactly what I just put here, right here. As soon as the ink hits that paper, you have assigned all right, title, and interest on the property or the contract. Okay? You're done. You're out right then. Whether the person closes or not is immaterial. And they don't have to pay you a damn thing. And your only recourse at that point is to sue them and take them to court. All right? So understand that. The assignment fees are paid at the time of the assignment, not some future closing. I mean, it just doesn't make any type of sense whatsoever that you would wait to get paid at a closing that may or may not happen on a closing that you're not even a party to and you should not be on the HUD for. Right? You sign the contract, bam, where's my check? Okay? Right then. I don't want a check. I personally want a wire, but I'm just saying most of you guys will take checks. So that's when you get paid on an assignment. All right, lease option. On SFR. SFR, for those of you who don't know, stands for single family residential. I'm not talking about multifamily, and I'm not talking about master lease options. I'm talking about standard single family residential lease option that all these stupid courses are sold. This is the panacea, the perfection, how to make money in real estate, blah, 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 blah. But what they don't tell you is all the facts about a disguised sale and what can happen to you, which is you can lose literally everything, including the property, because you created a disguised sale and you conveyed equitable interest in the property to the tenant optionee, even though you didn't think you did because you had one of these jackwagon contracts that these clowns are selling to you. And your intent up front was a sale. It wasn't a lease option. And all this stuff is documented. I mean, and for those of you who haven't heard this story before, I had a contracted on $1 million house out in San Diego a couple years ago. And when we contracted on the property, the seller who lived in Hawaii still had a tenant in the house, okay? And so we had to get the tenant out of the house, obviously, before we could do anything or do any showings or anything like that. Well, the tenant had been in the property for 7 years, everything on a lease option, okay? Standard lease option that you guys buy from these knuckleheads out here. And just so you understand, the seller was a professional investor who should have known better, number one. But number two, we're not talking about some broke dude, okay? He a multimillionaire, but he used the standard, lease option contract that you can get on the internet and find in 2 seconds. And so what happened? So tenant is there paying on time, fine for 5 years, no problems. Then all of a sudden loses his job, gets a divorce, and stops paying. Okay, he has no money, wife left him, and now he stops paying. Seller goes to evict, right? Because it's a lease with an option to purchase. The guy lawyers up. So now we have the tenant who can't afford or won't afford to make payments on the property. He hires an attorney instead of just paying the house, right? And the attorney found everything in the lease option that I would find as to, the fact that it's a disguised sale, right? And the fact that there has been equitable interest conveyed. And so the way the whole thing ended up was the seller got to eat 2 years worth of mortgage payments while the guy lived in the house for free. He then got to pay his own attorney's fees, right? He then got to also pay the attorney's fees for the tenant. And then, to make matters even worse, if all that wasn't bad enough, so he didn't lose the property under Dodd-Frank because he had a disguised sale, he ended up then having to pay, think about this now, how absurd this is, pay the non-paying tenant to settle to get him out of the property. Okay? And that's what happens on improperly structured lease options where the intent is a sale, you've created a disguised sale. And that's why I tell you guys, even though I've done tons of lease options myself personally and in business, there's only 2 times legitimately that you want to use them. Okay? And those 2 times are as follows. When the property is not, and I repeat, not marketed as rent to own. Okay? Or owner finance, or no banks needed, all that crap. Property is not marketed as a rent to own, and the tenant optionee, notice I didn't say tenant buyer because there's no such thing as a tenant buyer. The tenant and optionee legitimately doesn't know if they want to buy the property. Moving in from some other state, never been there before, don't know the area, don't know the neighborhood, not sure if they're going to like the house. In other words, they want to try before they buy. That's a legitimate lease option deal. Okay? You want to lease, you want to lock up the ability to purchase the property, you can lock in your price today. There's a benefit for that. And you're not committed to the purchase if you don't want to do that, right? That's a legit deal. The other time is when, like, you're dealing with investors, and this was really popular in Florida back in 2002, well, basically from 2000 to about 2008. What investors would do is they would lease option properties with the ability to sublet, and it's basically a sandwich lease. And then they would rent the properties out as either vacation rentals or as standard monthly rental. And the play was they would collect monthly cash flow and then wait to see if there was going to be appreciation in the marketplace. And if there was, then as an example, like on one deal we worked on, the guy ended up pulling $200,000 off of a deal he had lease optioned, and it was $200,000 in 2 years. Okay, so investor did a lease option. He had tenants in the property, and 2 years later he sold the property. He exercised his option and sold the property and cleared $200,000 because of the appreciation. Okay, fantastic deal all the way around. Okay, true win-win. That's another legitimate time to do a lease option. All right. So, other than that, you guys have any other questions? When we're talking about when to use what type of contract, you're not gonna know until you talk to the parties and determine what's going on with the property, and what also is going on with their level of understanding. Okay, what do they understand as far as it relates to? Are they educated and sophisticated enough to do a land trust, or do you need to do something simpler that's not going to kill your deal? Okay, but like I told you, when I go into a conversation with a buyer or a seller, yes, I have a concept in mind as to what I'm going to be using for a contract, but I do not know, and I will not know until I determine the circumstances of both parties on both sides of the transaction. Okay, and where a lot of people make a mistake is they go out there and, as an example, they buy a wholesale course, and so every deal now has to be forced into this wholesale deal structure. That's not what professional investors do. Okay, you want to become a full spectrum real estate investor, right? Not a one-trick pony, and you want to listen to the people that you're talking to. All right, listen to the people that you're talking to determine what's going to be the best strategy, number one, and number two, that'll then dictate for you what's going to be the best contract structure. Okay, if you try to force everything into the same thing, you're gonna miss out on a bunch of great deals. And I'll give you an example. I had these quote unquote wholesalers. This goes back years and years and years ago, where somebody would because they're advertising, what is it? What do they do? We buy houses, fast, or with cash, blah blah blah, whatever it is. So this guy calls me up. This is another investor calls me up one day, and he's like, he's a wholesale, quote unquote wholesaler, and he's used to dealing in the beater houses, right? The roach infested hoarder houses and the low end stuff, $30,000 to $100,000, and this is like a $350,000 house, which is on the low end for me and what we deal with. But nonetheless, he didn't know what to do with it, right? Because it was not a didn't need rehab. Okay, there had nothing to do with that. The guy was not really in duress. He was just trying to move from Florida to Atlanta so his wife could be closer to a medical center up there. And Guy doesn't know what to do with the deal. He's like, I know there's something here, blah, blah, blah. And, basically bringing me in on a deal for 50% to simply have a conversation with the guy and structure the contract in such a way that we could do an owner finance deal that would take the payments off the property in Florida off of him, right? We'd make our money. He wouldn't have to deal with that, and then he'd eventually get refinanced out, and that way he could buy a new property up in, buy and or rent a new property up in Atlanta, close to where the hospital was that they needed to be next to, okay? And the reason that ended up happening that way was because, like I said, a lot of these courses, they're singular in focus, and so when people are out there marketing, they're only trying to force every contract or every deal into the same exact contract model, and that's not the way deals work, okay? So you want to learn all the other strategies that you possibly can so you know effectively which one to use when an opportunity arises, all right? All right, Claude says, can lease options be used for short-term rentals? Okay. Let me see if I understand you here, and if I don't, let me know. If I understand correctly, I think what you're saying is, can you do a sandwich lease deal, and then instead of you doing a lease option with a tenant, you want to rent the property like a vacation rental to somebody else? If I think that's what you're saying, and of course the answer is yes, as long as you have the properly structured contract that gives you the ability to sublet, you can do whatever you want. It could be vacation renters. It can be, now, one thing you need to understand about vacation rentals is and maybe you're not talking about vacation rentals. I don't know. But if you're talking about vacation rentals, okay, so Airbnb, yeah, okay. I got to do a whole thing on this whole Airbnb nonsense that they keep showing out there because people don't understand for those of you who don't know my story, I've lived in nothing but vacation rentals, high-end luxury vacation rentals since 2008. Okay, right now I'm in a $1.3 million, 5,400 square foot vacation rental on a Jack Nicklaus golf course. Got a pool out back. We live in a guard-gated master plan community. There's, I think, 2 or 3 other golf courses in the neighborhood. There's a 5-star resort in the neighborhood. There's a massive water park with water slides, all this kind of stuff. A spa, gym, everything. It's all right here, right? Okay, a place called Reunion, Florida. And you got to understand how vacation rentals work, all right? And most people don't. They don't understand, and I've lived in more than, probably 150 of them since 2008, all over the United States. And they are not what they are sold to be, okay? What most people don't understand is the cost and expense of getting into them and getting them going, because you're providing a fully furnished property. So as an example, this house that I'm in right now, and all the rest of them they're the same exact way. All the furniture is already here, right? All the linens are here, towels are here, plates, knives, forks, spoons, glasses, the whole 9 yards, everything. It's all here, right? Flat panel TVs, internet's on. Basically, you walk in, you drop your bags, you crack a bottle of wine open, and you go sit out and watch the guys on the golf course. And meanwhile, while the kids are playing in the pool, right? And there's a lot of expense that goes into setting up vacation rentals, because it has to be, like when I say move-in ready, I'm talking about livable ready. Everything on, all the appliances, all the utilities, everything has to be on. Now, the other thing is that when you're dealing with these vacation rentals, and there's somebody, I don't know who it is, somebody's out there selling some course about blah, 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 how to make millions with Airbnb and all this stuff. And 2 things. Number one, I will tell you this. In the majority of the United States, vacation rentals, most of them are lucky to break even, okay? Unless you are in and I'll explain to you why that is in just a second, okay? Unless you are in a location like Orlando, the #1 tourist destination on planet Earth, most locations are, like I said, they're going to be very lucky just to break even on their expenses. And people are like, well, how's that possible? Because, here, I'll show you let me show you this. Some of you guys have seen this before. where the hell's the search bar? Search. Okay. So here is a So this is a post I did. This was February 10th, 2017. So, wow, it was actually 3 years ago today. Okay. You can, where'd it go? I'll show you guys this house. So 3 years ago today, you guys can go read this post. Okay. I explain the whole thing here. Here's the house. I'm going to zoom in on this so you guys can see it. It's 8 bedrooms, I think 5 baths. I can't remember. I had a bunch of them. I don't know if you guys can see this, but basically it's 8 bedrooms, 5 baths. There was, went too far. There we go. Hopefully it stops right there. All right, so 8 bedrooms, I think 5.5 baths, something like that. There was a whole fully furnished, decked out 2 bedrooms over here in the garage. That's where I worked out of, over the garage, overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. And this property at the time, average nightly rate you can see right here is $844 a night. Okay. And the post that I did 3 years ago, it was about the test strip thing, and I was showing people how I sat over here looking at the Gulf. And it was like Friday afternoon, and it was like, I don't know, it was like 2 o'clock, and I'm like, damn it, it's too early to stop and go drink wine, so I'm going to see how much money I can make here in the next half hour before I go over and play with the kids, and then eventually open a bottle of wine on the deck and watch this, the sunset over the Gulf of Mexico. So in the next 30 minutes, I generated $2,300 in cash in my account doing the medical commodities arbitrage. And I showed people this post so they could understand. And this is the house that we were in. And it was, like I said, 8 bedrooms, I think 5.5 baths. I can't remember exactly how many bathrooms they had. But, we had the pool, we had that right there, right there on the Gulf. And the place goes for $844 a night. Now, I'm telling you this because I'm not bragging, so don't misunderstand. I did not pay that for it. All right? So a house that goes for... And if I can zoom this thing back out. Where is it? Okay. So a house that goes for $844 a night, vacation rental. It's in Dunallen Beach, which is right on 30A. If you guys know Santa Rosa Beach up in the Panhandle, which is in between Destin and Panama City Beach. And you guys can go here and read this post. Just search. You can search Commander's Palace in the search bar. That's the name of the property. They name vacation rental properties, so that's the name of the property. I paid $700 a week, okay, for that monstrosity for 7 weeks, and then we stayed there for 7 weeks. All right. And why was I able to do that? Well, the reason that I was able to do that instead of paying $844 a night is multifold. And this, you guys need to understand this stuff if you're thinking about wasting time with these vacation rental courses and all that stuff. The reason I was able to negotiate that deal was because I was able to be there when others couldn't. Okay, so February 10th, at that point in time, it was prior to spring break starting, right? So all the kids are still in school, right? Nobody's vacationing at that point. You're in that lull in between New Year's Eve and spring break starting, and so that's how I was able to do that because nobody else could be there. Number one. Number two. They were going to be facing the property sitting there empty, and they would always rather have somebody in the property taking care of the property than not have somebody in the house. Okay? Because at least, if nothing else, we paid for the expense of the utilities, if that makes any sense. I didn't pay the utilities. What I'm saying is, for $700 a week, they weren't having to eat money on utilities to keep the gas, the electric, the water, all the stuff on during that period of time. Plus, of course, they've got insurance and everything else. So I was able to do that on that particular deal, that house. That's not the biggest or most expensive house we've stayed in. But it's a vacation rental, okay? What you guys think of as Airbnb, okay? We got it off that website that we were just looking at is what's called VRBO.com, which stands for Vacation Rental by Owner.com. And, I was able to put that deal together and stay there for 7 weeks for $700 a week because who else were they going to rent it to? You're talking about the ocean is huge vacation, but you're looking at very specific times when people can be there. Okay, in other words, probably the largest group of people that go to Santa Rosa Beach are from Atlanta. That's where we went to it for the very first time, and very few people, they can't be there at the times that I can be there, if that makes sense. Number one, and then number two, the periods of time that people can be there, they can't be there as long as I can be because they have to go back to wherever their job is, right? And so you take this house right here, which is a fantastic house, nothing wrong with the house, absolutely fantastic. And they get up to, in the summertime peak season, I mean, they're getting, $30,000 plus per month, but they got to make all their money on the holidays and the holiday weekends. And, the biggest time there, you got obviously over the summer, you got whatever it is, whenever kids go to school, June, July, August, and then it dies, right? It dies after school goes back in until Labor Day. And then you got one big weekend for Labor Day, and then it dies again, and it's dead until Thanksgiving week, right? And all this time, you're lucky to get, 3-day weekend person in there, okay? And so the point I'm trying to make to you is that you got to really know what you're doing if you're going to waste time on these vacation rental things. And you better have some deep pockets because unless you're walking into something that's already set up as a vacation rental where you're like taking it over on contract or something, you're going to have to be shelling out, easily a good 50 plus grand on a normal house because you got to buy all the TVs, you got to buy all the appliances, linens, towels, forks, knives, spoons. I mean, anything and everything you can think, all the furniture, all that stuff has to be in the property so that when somebody comes in, they can live there immediately. Okay? That's the way the vacation rentals are set up. And that's why when I see these things about, there's great investments and all this kind of stuff, I'm just telling you, this house right here, as wonderful as it is, okay, they're at break even though they can rent it for $30,000 a month, okay, for 3 months out of the year, and then they can pop some people at, $800-900 a night for other periods of time. You have to think about all those other times when people cannot and are not there where they're making no money and the property's just sitting there vacant. Okay, and that's on the ocean. So, here in Orlando, it's a little different because, if you were saying, hey, where should I go? I mean, certainly Orlando would be a much better place because you've got, again, number one tourist destination on the planet, and you have a ton of international people that come in that can be here when the Americans are, not on holiday. Okay, if that makes any sense. So, like the Europeans come over, like a lot of them are over here right now, where the U.S. is not on holiday yet. It's not spring break yet, and so there's a lot of Europeans and South Americans and things like that are here presently right now because they can, they take their holidays and their whole system is set up differently than what we are. But anyway, there you have it. Anybody have any other questions? Because I think we about wrapped everything up here. Make sure. Nope. Okay. Well, fantastic. Guys, listen, thanks. Hope that was beneficial. Hope that helped. If you need any specific information on an actual deal as to what type of contract you should be using, then all you need to do is post a question in the Facebook group and tag me, and I'll be happy to answer it for you. Tell you exactly what I would do. On that, you guys have a fantastic day.